In this lesson, we wanted to remove out these event listeners from being in line within the HTML and move it right within our JavaScript. So this is going to make those event listers a whole lot more functional and give us the ability to really utilize these different elements. So here we're looking at, so we've got a list item. So we can attach IDs to them as well, or we could make that whole get element by ID and attach those event listeners in that type of format. Let's first start out by creating our selection here, and we're going to use the query selector to select out that list item. So let's go ahead and create that one. So this is the list item, and we're going to create it using document. So that's query selector, and from here we're going to pick out, so we've got an ID of nav, we've got an unordered list underneath there, and so we don't have any classes there. So this potentially could be an issue here making our selection. So maybe a better one for now might be get elements by tag name. And we're going to collect all the list items, so we're turning all of those back. So now we've got essentially an object here with list item, or we should maybe call it list items, containing all those list items. So typically, if we only had one, we could add in an event listener to it. So we could do something like list items, and we could pick up the first one in the list. And we could add an on-click event to it. And this would be the same thing if we did get element by ID. If we only had one, we could attach the on-click to it and fire off the change me function. And immediately there might be some issues here. So let's take a look at this, and first I'm going to remove this one out over here off of the home, and let's see if this fires off. So now we click it, and we still have functionality in that second one, but in the first one we actually don't see anything happening. So what do you think is happening here, and why do you think it's not working? So we identify that list item. We can also console log this out to take a better look and make sure that we are actually passing a value. We can add in something in here as well to console log out the value of E. So maybe that's a hint there as to what is the problem here. So let's see what happens now whenever we click that item. So we are clicking it, we are being able to pick it up, but we see it as a mouse event. So we're not actually getting that object information as we want it to. Set the background property. So much like this one here, we still can do this because we're passing over that element information. So we got to make sure that we're also passing over that element information, and in order to do this we can pass this over, but we have to set the function here and we have to pass that information over. So we could, typically you might think that you could do something like this, but right now this isn't contained as anything. We don't have any value within this quite yet. So let's update this to work. So creating a function and wrapping that other function that gets called within this function. And so the idea is that now we've created an object that contains this, and now we can pass it over into the function as we were previously. So now when we click it, everything's working. So there's a roundabout way of getting around this and setting that up. And now all we would have to do is loop through all the different list items to make sure that we can pick them all up and we can add all of that functionality. So let's take a look at that, remove out these console logs, and create our loop of all of our items, our list items. So let's do a for loop here, and we'll do x equals 0, and we're going to do this while x is So we've got a value there for list items, so list items dot length. Well, the value of list items dot length is still greater than x, and then we're going to continue the loop. And looping around, and make sure that we add in this function within it. And now all we need to do is update this, and let's check this out and see if this is actually going to work. So now we've added in that one and this one, and we've looped through all the different items in our list. We've added in this event listener to them, so we've got the ability to remove it out of our HTML code, and this was the real objective here, that we wanted to remove this out, the event listener, pass it into our JavaScript and utilize it within our JavaScript and operate it within that same functionality that we had when we had them inline, the JavaScript inline within our HTML code. So now we've got everything working the same way as before, and the really neat thing about it is if we add in a bunch of other list items, they're going to get that same built-in functionality. So they're already ready to go, and it doesn't matter how many we add in. If we update our HTML, our actual functionality is not going to get interfered with. And that's the really good thing about adding it in with the JavaScript, because it really makes it dynamic and makes your code a whole lot more flexible. So we're also going to look at in the next lesson, so we looked at how we can add these on clicks, and it's a lot simpler if you've just got one list item here. So if I've got get element by ID, so just going to show you that as an example. So variable output, and if we use document get element by ID, this is going to be a whole lot simpler. So I think I started out with a more complex version and worked down from there, but that's okay. So get element by ID, and here all we have to do is add that on click event. So maybe for this one we're going to do a different event here, and as you can see we've got a whole bunch of them here. So maybe as we move mouse over, then we're going to fire off that function. So we can really do that same functionality here. So we've got the on mouse over, and we can fire off an event there within that object. So we don't actually even have to include a variable there. So we've got that on mouse over, and we can fire off a function here for that. So every time we mouse over, so we'll just console log out just to make sure that we're getting some content here and we've got some information here. So let's check this out, and now whenever we're moving over it, we're actually getting that value there. So everything looks pretty good and ready to go. So now we can do maybe something similar to what we did down here, where we check to see what the value of this is. So we can do this style, and if it's red, then we change it to blue, and we don't need these ones here. Just quickly beautify this, make it look a little bit more readable and presentable, and let's check this out now and see if this works. So now whenever we hover over it, we get this blinking effect. And definitely a whole lot easier to add these event listeners if I'm only dealing with one element as opposed to multiple elements that could dynamically change. So those are just the two ways, and of course you've got a lot of options here as event listeners here. You can see a full list of them whenever you open up your DOM on any element, and you can find out more information about the different options here, the mouse over and so on. And click and the mouse movements are probably some of the more common ones that are used within web page development. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at even more options here with event listeners and so on. So that's coming up.